At midnight, I felt my stepfather's hands crushing my throat while my own mother stood in the doorway, watching, silent. No scream, no plea, no movement, just her vacant eyes fixed on me as I fought for air. That was the moment something inside me shattered for good. My name is Maria, and I serve in U.S. Army intelligence attached to Special Forces. People think soldiers are only broken on foreign battlefields, but my deepest wound didn't come from war. It came from home. Before I tell you how a single SOS saved my life, you need to understand how I got there. Rain needled the window like a warning I couldn't quite read. I sat in my small on-base apartment with the lamp turned low, checking the deadbolt for the third time, pulse drumming in my ears. The storm outside was loud, but the storm behind my ribs was louder, a cold pressure that said the real danger wasn't in the sky, it was walking around with my memories. 0:03. 3 polite knocks. 2 polite. I held my breath and lifted to the peephole. No one there. The hall looked empty, washed in the yellow hum of the corridor light. The door exploded inward. He filled the frame first, tall, soaked, rain slicking off a denim jacket, the sour heat of whiskey hitting me before his voice did. Behind him, my mother stood with her hair plastered to her face, water dripping from her coat, her eyes vacant like glass that had seen a fire and gone dull. "Thought you could hide," Rick sneered, and the room shrank. I moved before fear could decide for me. Hip turn, shoulder drive, the muscle memory of 1,000 drills. He stumbled, then came back with his weight like a wall falling. We crashed into the table. Wood barked against bone, and something in my shoulder popped with a bright, nauseating crack. Stars flared. He slammed me down, forearm at my throat, breath reeking of old anger and cheap liquor. Air became a rumor. The ceiling tilted. My phone lay inches from my hand, face down, screen black. I clawed for it, thumb slipping over wet glass. 2 swipes, 1 press, muscle memory again. Not the kind they teach in manuals, but the kind you program when you know a night like this is coming. The SOS sequence pulsed under my skin like a second heartbeat. Pressure tightened at my windpipe. Sound tunneled. The storm outside faded to a distant drum. Rick's face blurred above me, all edges in hate. I turned my head toward the doorway. My mother stood there, water pooling at her feet, hands limp at her sides. No scream, no plea, just that empty stare, as if someone had removed her from her body and left the shell to witness the rest. My thumb finished the final tap. Somewhere far away, a signal left the room, and all I could do was watch her watching me. I grew up beneath the wide, dry skies of Albuquerque, where nights were sharp with desert air and stars burned so bright it felt like they could guide you anywhere. My father used to take me outside, point to the North Star, and say, "No matter how lost you feel, you'll always find your way back if you follow this one." He was my anchor, the steady pulse of our family, the one who could fix anything, from broken fences to the shadows in my mind. That world shattered when I was 12. One afternoon, while I was finishing homework at the kitchen table, a knock came at the door. 2 men in suits delivered words that didn't make sense at first. An accident at the lab, an explosion, no survivors. My father was gone in an instant. My mother folded into herself, retreating into a bedroom where the curtains stayed shut and the air smelled of dust and silence. I wandered through the house like a ghost, heating ramen noodles in the microwave, reading laundry instructions just to figure out how to survive. Every sound felt hollow without him there. Then Rick appeared. He came first as a contractor, fixing our leaky roof, broad-shouldered, with a booming laugh and calloused hands. He carried in the kind of energy our house hadn't seen in years. He brought groceries, left cartons of milk in the fridge, made my mother laugh with corny jokes. For the first time in months, I heard her voice break through the silence, saw her smile. To me, he felt like a stranger barging into sacred ground, but to her, he looked like a savior. The day they announced their engagement, Rick handed me a small velvet box. Inside lay a silver necklace. My mother's eyes shimmered with tears as he clasped it around my neck. But what she couldn't see was the way he leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. "Your dad is gone," he whispered. "From now on, you'll know your place." My blood ran cold, but I forced a smile for my mother's sake. She saw love and security. I felt the first link of a chain being locked around my throat. After the wedding, Rick wasted no time turning the house into his kingdom. Doors were no longer allowed to close unless we were sleeping. Privacy became a crime. Any paycheck I brought home was his to collect. Every cent recorded in a notebook he kept on the kitchen table. I got my first $100 from working as a barista at the corner cafe, the kind of money that made me feel independent, almost free. Rick sat waiting when I came home. The notebook open. He took the check, endorsed it, and ordered me to write down the hours, date, and total. "Nothing in this house is free," he said. "You eat my food. You live under my roof. You contribute." On my birthday, my mother tried to rebel in the smallest way she could. She baked my favorite lasagna. The smell filled the kitchen with something close to love again. But before I could take a second bite, Rick gave her a look, and she whispered an apology to him, like a prisoner caught sneaking contraband. When I won a district essay contest with a piece about my father and the ocean, I rushed home with the certificate. Rick glanced at the paper, smirked, and tossed it onto the counter like trash. "What are you going to do with this? Write greeting cards?" He scoffed. His words cut deep, but what broke me was watching my mother bow her head in silence, siding with him by saying nothing. That night, she came into my room, her hands trembling as she sat on the edge of my bed. She didn't look at me right away, just stared at the floor. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "If you ever see the fence painted green, it means danger. Don't ask questions. Just run." It wasn't advice. It was a code. A desperate lifeline slipped into my palm in the dark. For the first time, I realized my mother was as trapped as I was, and the chains around us weren't just visible rules. They were invisible, tightening every day. I turned 18 with one thought pulsing louder than any birthday candle. Leave. New Mexico had become a cage, and Rick the warden. I signed my enlistment papers with a shaking hand and boarded a bus that carried me farther than any fence ever could. Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington was a different kind of desert, gritty, relentless, designed to strip you down to bone and rebuild what was left. The days blurred into mud, sweat, and shouted orders. My body folded under the weight of endless drills, but every time I hit the dirt, I forced myself back up. It was the only way to prove, if only to myself, that I wasn't broken beyond repair. That's where I met Hanson. Tall, sharp-edged, a Texan with eyes like steel. She carried herself like she had nothing to prove and dared anyone to test her. From day one, we were rivals, pushing harder, running faster, trying to outlast each other. But rivalry broke the day I slipped on wet stone during a ruck march and felt my ankle snap with a white-hot crack. The world narrowed to pain. I expected her to stride past, to let me fail like the rules said she should. Instead, Hanson stopped, knelt, and without a word, hoisted my 60-pound pack onto her shoulders. She braced my leg with branches, then pulled me to my feet. "Get up," she grunted, steadying me with one arm. "In the woods, no one gets left behind." That single sentence carved itself into me. Family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was sweat, grit, and the hand that refused to let you fall. For the first time in years, I felt the lock around my chest loosen. I had found my way out, but in the back of my mind, Rick's shadow followed, whispering that escape was never final. Years later, I returned to Albuquerque, carrying the uniform and the confidence of a soldier, but also a knot of dread that tightened as soon as I walked into the old house. The air smelled the same, but the walls betrayed me. My father's smiling photo, once the heart of our living room, was gone. In its place, Rick's trophies grinned, Him crouched beside the carcasses of deer and boar, the shine of bloodless victory in his eyes. That night, at dinner, he played the role of benevolent patriarch. He talked loudly about the bills he'd paid, the roof he'd repaired, the sacrifices he made to keep this family afloat. My mother nodded along, eyes down, her fork pushing food without appetite. Later, when the table cleared, I slipped into the study. Stacks of old documents lined the desk. There I found it. Paperwork showing Rick had cashed in my father's life insurance, twisting grief into profit. My stomach churned as I realized he hadn't just stolen years from us. He had profited off my father's death. Outside on the porch, he found me. He leaned close, his breath sour with beer, and whispered, "I know where you are. Don't think you've slipped free." Before the chill left my spine, my mother tugged me into the kitchen, her voice barely audible. "Green fence," she whispered, eyes darting to the hall. It was our old code. A lifeline, a warning. Danger is here. Don't linger. I left that night with my chest heavy. I had escaped. Yes, but my mother remained shackled in a prison that looked like a home, and the shadow of Rick stretched longer than any desert sunset, following me back into the life I had tried so hard to rebuild. Back at my on-base apartment in Tacoma, I tried to slip into routine again. Early reports, long hours in the intel cell, evening runs, weekend beers with Hanson. But peace felt brittle, like glass stretched too thin. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car, tugged at the edge of my nerves. One night my phone buzzed with a blocked number. I answered, breath tight, silence. Then faintly, as if from another room, came the familiar drawl of a country song, Friends in Low Places, Rick's drunk anthem from every barbecue of my teenage years. My stomach dropped. The next morning, while heading out for PT, I spotted a cigarette butt crushed into the concrete just below my bedroom window. Marlboro Red. His brand. A week later, my neighbor stopped me in the parking lot, phone in hand. He'd caught footage on his Ring camera. A dark pickup truck crawling down our street in the rain. New Mexico plates blurred by water. The sight hit me like a fist to the chest. He was here. I filed for a temporary restraining order, but the clerk's voice was flat, practiced. Not enough direct evidence of threat. Paper shields couldn't stop a man like Rick. That night, my phone buzzed again. A single text from my mother. Green fence. My throat closed. It was our code. Danger. She was still trapped with him, and he was slipping further into chaos. Standing in my dark kitchen, phone cold in my hand, I finally understood. Rick wasn't just a shadow-haunting memory anymore. He was flesh and bone, driving closer with every mile, pressing himself against the edges of my life until the locks on my door felt like tissue paper. I met Hanson in the dim break room of our unit, the hum of vending machines filling the silence. We sat shoulder to shoulder, laptop open between us, its glow turning our faces pale and tight. "We need a plan," she said, voice low but steady. We set up the system, an SOS code in our group chat. One tap, and the entire team would be mobilized. Military police, Tacoma PD. Everyone. No hesitation. I stashed a sketched floor plan in my desk drawer. Escape routes marked in thick red. A can of pepper spray went under my pillow. Hanson leaned in, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If he shows up, the unit treats this like a hostage rescue. We're not letting him get near you." As if summoned, my phone vibrated. A new message from my mother. "He's talking about a long drive, very far." My skin prickled. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was prophecy. Hanson caught my eye, her expression carved from steel. "This isn't family business anymore. This is a mission, and we finish missions." I closed the laptop with a click that sounded louder than it should. For the first time, my chest loosened. Fear hadn't left me, but it had been reshaped into something else. Readiness. The final collision wasn't a question now. It was a countdown, and I knew it would end at my door. The storm outside had turned the world into a drum. Rain pounding against the windows, wind rattling the frame of my small apartment. Lightning carved brief scars of light across the ceiling, but inside everything felt suspended. Waiting. My eyes locked on the glowing clock. 0:03. 3 knocks. 2 polite, 2 precise, each one echoing like a countdown. I crept to the door, heart hammering so hard it seemed to shake the walls with the storm. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing, just the empty hall, washed in flickering yellow light. I turned, pulse racing. The door burst open with a violent crack. Rick stormed in, rain streaming off him, eyes bloodshot and wild. Whiskey stung the air between us. And behind him, my mother, her hair plastered to her face, water dripping from her coat. She stood like a statue, hollow-eyed, as if her soul had already fled. Instinct snapped through me. I dropped into stance, pivoted on my heel, and used his momentum to throw him hard. He staggered, but came back twice as fast, rage pouring off him. He caught me mid-step, slamming me into the edge of the table. Pain detonated in my shoulder, a sharp crack that turned my arm useless. Before I could recover, he drove me to the floor. His weight crushed the air from my lungs. Calloused hands wrapped around my throat, fingers digging like iron clamps. The world shrank to pressure and panic. I clawed at his wrists, but he pressed harder, his face inches from mine, twisted with fury. Spots bloomed in my vision, black swallowing the edges. My body screamed for oxygen. Somewhere in the blur, my hand brushed the phone on the floor. My thumb slid clumsily, half blind, across slick glass. Swipe, tap, another tap. The SOS sequence burned into my muscles did the rest. The last thing I saw before the dark closed in was my mother, frozen in the doorway, rain dripping from her lashes like tears she wouldn't shed. And then, through the roar of blood in my ears, came the pounding of boots, heavy, urgent, undeniable. The door frame splintered a second time, this time from the force of salvation. The storm outside had finally broken in, but so had something far stronger. I woke in the sterile brightness of the military hospital, shoulder strapped tight in a brace, my face swollen and tender with every breath. The antiseptic sting in the air made it real. I had survived. In the plastic chair beside me sat Hanson, still in her fatigues, boots caked with mud, her head nodding forward in stubborn half-sleep. She hadn't left my side. Rick hadn't walked away either. He'd been dragged out in cuffs, pinned between military police and Tacoma PD, spitting curses that meant nothing once the steel closed around his wrists. For the first time in years, he wasn't looming over me. He was contained. Weeks later, I found myself in a federal courtroom, the flag draped high above the judge's bench. The JAG officers had built the case piece by piece, a fortress of evidence, forged insurance documents, bank records, testimony from my neighbors, the trail of his truck across state lines. Federal prosecutors laid out every charge: fraud, interstate stalking, aggravated assault with intent. The walls he had built to trap us were now the walls closing in on him. His lawyer tried to twist it, painting me as an ungrateful stepdaughter, a runaway desperate to ruin a good man's name. He leaned on the word rebellious until it felt like a stain. He even turned to the jury, voice oily, sneering. She's nothing more than a resentful child lashing out. Then the air in the room shifted. Hanson rose from her seat in the gallery. Beside her, one by one, every member of my unit stood. No words, no outbursts, just rows of uniforms, shoulders squared, eyes fixed sharp as steel on the defense table. Their silence thundered louder than any gavel. The lawyer faltered mid-sentence, lips dry, eyes darting as if looking for an escape that wasn't there. The jury watched, and in that moment, the weight of truth anchored the room. The verdict came swift, guilty on all counts. Rick's face drained as the judge delivered years that would keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. The final sound that echoed through the courtroom wasn't his protest. It was the metallic click of the door as it shut behind him. Justice, at last, had a sound of its own. Months later, the desert welcomed me back, with heat shimmering off the asphalt and the endless stretch of blue sky overhead. Albuquerque looked smaller than I remembered, but the Sandia Mountains still guarded the horizon, like they always had. I stood with my mother in the middle of the balloon fiesta grounds, surrounded by a sea of color. Dozens of hot air balloons swelled against the morning light, their bright fabrics lifting slowly, like giant lungs filling with freedom. She reached for my hand, her fingers thin but steady now. For a long moment she said nothing, just watched the balloons rise, her face bathed in their glow. Then her voice broke the silence, quiet and fragile. "I'm sorry for being silent for so long." I turned, squeezing her hand. "I know," I whispered, "and we're free now." We stood like that, mother and daughter, tethered not by fear, but by survival, watching the sky open above us. The crowd around us cheered as a cluster of balloons drifted upward, but all I heard was the release in my chest, the weight lifting. In the weeks that followed, I filed paperwork, made calls, reached out to advocates who had once stood in the shadows like me. That was how Blue Fence Network was born, a hotline and support system for service members and their families caught in cycles of abuse. The name came from the code my mother had whispered to me in the dark: green fence. A warning once meant to save me, now transformed into a beacon for others. The last balloon of the morning rose above us, a brilliant mosaic against the desert sky. I felt the wind rush over my face, warm and unbroken, and I let myself believe it was carrying us both into something new. I thought, I am not defined by my wounds, but by the lives I pull out of the storm. And for the first time in years, I lifted my eyes to the horizon without fear.